All right. What's up, everybody? Hopefully, we are now live as Google Hangouts never seems to fail us with technical issues. But we're here now. Sorry for the little delay. And as you may have already gathered, today we're going to be talking about with Millennial Prepsters and what Millennial Prepster. And what we're going to be talking about is food sovereignty and how that relates to capital V, the ideology of veganism, not the diet, but the ideology. And well, I guess we'll just take it from there. I am not that well versed in food sovereignty. I understand what it is. I might not know its history very well, but just to give you guys who may not know anything about it an idea of what we're going to be talking about, I'm just going to read from Wikipedia a little bit about what it is. Food sovereignty is a term coined by members of Via Campesina in 1996, and it asserts that the people who produce, distribute, and consume food should control the mechanisms and policies of food production and distribution rather than the corporations and market institutions they believe have come to dominate the global food system. It also encompasses the right of peoples to a healthy and culturally appropriate food and their right to define their own food and agriculture systems. Anyway, that's basically what it is. How you doing, Millennial?
I'm doing good. How you doing, brother? It's been a long week.
All right, well, that's good.
But I'm super excited, and like I'm sure some of your followers saw last time, food sovereignty and talking about just especially economic policies in regards to food is something that I've been tracking for years, and it's something that I get very animated and excited about. So I look forward to having a discussion with you guys and kind of really getting a deep dive into what it is, because I feel like this is such a huge factor when we're talking about veganism, our diet, just everything in general, and it's something that vegans will refuse to touch, and they will refuse to look at it. They just will. They can't. You can't hold your ideology and take food sovereignty serious. You know what I mean? And a lot of people may not understand how that is, but that's why I kind of hope to break some of that down for you today.
Well, what is it to you, first and foremost, food sovereignty? Because I'll tell you this much: the way the concept ever since Via Campesina, who were a bunch of international farm workers, basically food producers, ever since they coined the term, it's been reinterpreted many times. And for example, for me, it extends, and they kind of talk about that too, but me as an individual, I have the right to the kind of diet, I have the right to determine the diet that I eat, and as whether I am a food producer or a consumer, and I am both just as you, I feel like we should have, first and foremost, us, people who produce and consume food, we should have the right to determine how the distribution works, what we eat, what we produce, and there should be minimal interference from corporations or anybody else, like, let's say, these authoritarian vegans who want to tell us what to eat and how to produce it. So why don't you tell us how you see it?
Great. I think the best way for me to kind of go into this is a quote, if you guys don't mind. And I know this sounds very poetic and cheesy, but like I said, this will really get down to the meat of what I'm trying to say, no pun intended. So it's by Bill Mollison. Bill Mollison's probably known as one of the founders of the permaculture movement in like modern day society, in which, really pushing towards these more economic and, sustainable systems. And this is what he said: the greatest change we can make is from the consumption to the production, even if it's on a small scale in our own gardens. If only 10% of us do this, there is enough for everyone. Hence the futility of revolutionaries, vegans, who have no gardens, who depend on the very system they attack, who produce words and bullets and not food and shelter. So I think that's kind of how that's how I'm looking at this, because when we're looking at these systems, and I agree with you, I definitely think that free market principles can help everybody win. But at the same time, when you're looking at this lens strictly through a capitalism sense or strictly through a socialistic sense, you're going to run into problems when we're talking about food. So yes, I do agree that a farmer should be able to control the products and the services he provides, just like I think the consumer driving market forces, should be able to decide, what they're wanting to consume and eat. Now, the problem with that is when, which there really isn't a problem, because if a farmer wants to produce a product that no one wants to buy, well, then fine, that farmer isn't going to get over very long. But the problem is when we introduce when we introduce government subsidies, when you have a farmer that's producing something that somebody doesn't want, but somebody's still giving that farmer money to produce said product. Does that make sense? And so that's kind of the first dive I want to take into this. And yeah, feel free to question me, dig a little bit, or give your own opinions on that first and foremost.
It makes sense, and what you just said makes me think of, for example, grain, be it corn or soy. And these farmers being given subsidies to grow it for ethanol first and foremost. I don't have the statistics in front of me, but I know a large portion of the food, quote unquote, would be food that's grown, like soy and corn, actually goes to, produce ethanol, which isn't very sustainable the way they're producing it right now. I could understand these grains and the oils that come from them going into, paint production and like machinery oil and that type of stuff. But I was just reminded of how the government, will subsidize these farmers to grow what's classified as food, and then later, because the refuse from like the oil extraction gets fed to animals, all of a sudden, the cattle gets blamed for all this grain being grown for it, when the primary purpose of that grain is actually the industry and what they get, which isn't to say that they don't get whole grain also, because they do. But a lot of what they get in their feed is actually the byproduct of something completely different.
I think that's a great point, and I just want to make sure that we clear this, because I'm pretty sure you and me have both said this before on other forums, but I just want your viewers to be 100% aware, and I'm saying this without equivocation, that it's factually known that when vegans are tying all this climate change stuff, all these statistics, they're taking and they're blaming it all on animal agriculture. They're not taking into part the plant agriculture that had to go into it, because they're including all of plant agriculture because the end product is grains, and since there's a certain percentage of that goes to animals, they take on the burden of the entire ethanol industry. They take on the burden of the entire plant industry. All that runoff from farms that have no animals still gets blamed on animal agriculture, because a percentage of that food process goes to animal agriculture. Now, I will say without equivocation that I do not support big agriculture at all. I don't support, big animal farms and factory farms and stuff like that. So that goes without saying. But it's also, if I'm being intellectually honest, right? Because especially coming from my point of view, it's very easy to do. Being intellectually honest, you can't say, well, all these other supporting subsidiaries do X, Y, and Z, but since the percentage goes to this final market, then that means that this final market's to blame. That's like saying that, Ford, Chevy, all these industries produce all these bad things, but at the end of the day, it's only this person that buys this car that gets all the blame. You can't do that. You have to be very honest, and you have to say where these problems are coming from, because until you do that, you can't fix it, right? If you're saying, well, the end result is to blame for everything, we'll just fix the end result. Well, no, you're not. That's not going to fix anything. So I think that's really important to look at, and I'm glad that you brought that up. I'm glad we can address that early on, just so your viewers can know. And I encourage, don't take my word for it. Actually go up and look at what it is that these vegans are saying, because the facts and information are out there. But when you see these documentaries, they say, well, animal agriculture is the number one. Well, no, if you blame everything on animal agriculture because there's a percentage of services that go to that animal agriculture, sure, you can do that, but that's not even close to being intellectually honest.
Yeah, I think we got off on a little bit of a tangent, and that's totally my fault. So I'm going to try to bring us back on topic of food sovereignty and something, the quote that you gave, uh, talking about how vegans attack the very system on which they depend on, uh, also made me think of something I've been thinking about for a while, and it's this idea that somehow vegans imagine that we could just completely overhaul the way we produce food and the way we feed people, and it's just going to work like and go off without a hitch because they quote some BS statistics like what we just talked about and some fraudulent data, and they're completely ignorant and ungrateful, I would say, to the very system that allowed them to be exactly where they are, right? I mean, most vegans weren't born vegan; they grew up eating animal products, and the way this entire world exists, like it or not, is because we do eat animals, and they have contributed, lots of nutrition and protein. And whether you like it or not, our brains have gotten bigger because of, if not entirely, definitely in large part, to animal fat and protein that we've been consuming. And we've been able to build this civilization that might not be perfect, but it is what it is. And you take this integral part like meat consumption and animal product consumption out of this society just about overnight, which is what they seem to want to do. You don't think that's going to have grave repercussions on your own way of life? Like they seem so ignorant and oblivious of what it is that they're actually asking for and what repercussions it might have on their very own lives.
Right, and I have a video out there where I basically attach clips from famous vegan activists. And so at the end of the day, you're totally right. And the fact that the average person can't see this, and like I said, I've yet to have this refuted, because every time I bring this up, you always get the insert fallacy here argument. Instead of taking ownership, that's what they do. So best case scenario for a vegan, right? This is what we're going to do, guys. We are going to leave our petroleum-powered domicile. We're going to get in our petroleum-powered transportation. We're going to go to the petroleum-powered grocery store that also sells animal murder and all these other insert hashtag signs here. We're going to use fiat currency to purchase plant products that have been grown in cancer. They have been harvested by child labor. They have pesticides, fungicides, herbicides, all these carcinogens in them. We're paying for a subsidized market. We're then taking that plant-based food that also, keep in mind, costs to the tune of hundreds of millions of animal deaths back to our oil-powered transportation, going back to our oil-powered house, and somehow that is virtuous. Because that's exactly what it is that they're saying that is the perfect system. And if they're not saying that, then why are they advocating that? Because that's exactly what it is. And that's not me trying to overly make something sound horrible and mean. No, these plant residues, child labor. Like, if you think child labor is just is a misnomer and it doesn't exist, if you think hundreds of millions of animal deaths by poisoning is just is just a misnomer, if you think fiat currency and economic issues are misnomers, I don't know how we can even have a conversation. This isn't me being overly graphic about it. This is just me being factually honest, intellectually honest. And like I said, when you bring this up, the only thing that you get is, well, insert fallacy here. And it's like, well, if we can't have the conversation just based upon actual, ethics, can we talk about math? No. Can we talk about science? No. It's like, well, then what conversation are we trying to have here? So I totally agree with you.
Well, I mean, the arguments that vegan propose, let's not kid ourselves. Veganism, capital V, veganism, comes out of emotion. I mean, it's an emotionally based movement that's really about, first and foremost, it's about animal welfare. That is their primary goal, and everything else is basically going to be subservient to that. Everything else is going to get warped to fit that ideology.
And they fail.
Of course they fail, because they don't have any arguments.
You can't say that you're about animal welfare and say, well, humans are animals, therefore you should treat them just as good. Well, how about the children that are being enslaved right now? How about the hundreds of millions of animals that are being poisoned and their lungs filling up with their own blood because the poisons that we're putting down on the ground? What about Gala, right? The earth in which we live on, you know? So if you're really going to talk, you know, and I get it, and I don't want to get off on a tangent, but I think we're on the same page. And I think people should look at that realistically. You can't say that humans and animals are equal and then say it's okay for children to be put under horrible conditions so you can have a carrot. You know, you just can't.
Yeah, and you know, it goes a lot deeper than that. And like for example, when it comes to sustainability, and we touched upon that in our last talk. For example, quinoa, and I know this very well because I live in Latin America, and it has always been a traditional crop here, you know,
Right.
grown in small quantities enough to feed the local population. But because all these corporations have marketed this marvelous grain, you know, as this amazing grain, which it isn't. It's a second-rate food. That's what I'm talking about. They marketed to the Western world as this superfood, and everybody all of a sudden put a huge burden. And there's benefits to this, don't get me wrong, because these farmers have been able to make more money also, so that's good. But it's put a huge burden on local farmers and their environment, because they've had to, you know, destroy a lot of natural environment to be able to grow this quinoa. Local prices of quinoa have gone up where they could no longer afford it like they used to be able
Right.
to. And, you know, and then there's this whole question of targeting that crop all across the globe, all over the globe, you know, which there's issues like petroleum being used to move this crop around, you know, instead of just eating locally grown foods. And then there's health issues because, look, you're not uh, part of this population that's eaten this forever. And quinoa's got a lot of toxins in it that have to be removed, something that Native Americans have learned to do traditionally. Excuse me. And they've been doing that. They've been able to detoxify this crop. And I had to take a sip of water, sorry.
No worries. No.
You know, so there's questions of sustainability locally here in Latin America. There are questions of sustainability globally, having to use petroleum to move that crop around the world when they already have
Right.
a source of protein in, let's say, in America. And then there are questions of health also, because, you know, somebody who is not from a culture that knows how to process this crop, they're not necessarily benefiting their health just, you know, cooking it and making quinoa soup.
No, I completely agree with you. And at the end of the day, right, and I think you brought up a really good point that I hope to get into. At the end of the day, when we're really talking about sustainability, we have to really you have to really decide what the goals are, because unfortunately, if you're just looking at the news, and especially, you know, this is going to be, you know, and I think this is where it's true. And I don't like the fact that it's true, but take you and me, right? You are in another country than I am, and based upon different political factors, and let's just be honest, we can talk about tariffs, we can talk about all these things. Just take a look. That's what's happening right now, and these are facts. And I really need your viewers. If you get nothing from this, these two lines are what I really want to hit home. In the U.S. alone, annually, farms, plant agriculture gets subsidized to the tune of $20 billion. And with the new economic tariffs that are being put in place, the industry has requested $12 billion more dollars. Okay, so this year, agriculture is getting subsidized more than oil. Okay, if you look at the European Union, the EU, okay, they get to the tune of about 52 billion euros, so about $82 billion. Now, we need to be very honest with ourselves right now, okay? What's the population in the United States of America? It's around $325 million. So the fact that we are spending $32 billion, if you give me $1 million, I can be food sufficient for me and my entire neighborhood for the rest of our lives, right? So
Yeah.
you got to really think, if we're giving this much money to subsidize agriculture, we should be able to go in and get food for free. But the reality is we're subsidizing $32 billion for food, and the prices of produce are going up. Now, if you think that's okay, if you think that's sustainable, if you think that's anything other than horrific, like I said, they're facts and logic you don't care about. I mean, we can't even talk about ethics at this point until you can justify that. You know, screw talking about how many deaths and how bad it is for the environment. Just look at it economically for a second. If you think that that's okay, you know, there's no real conversation to be had. And I really encourage your viewers to go and look at that just based upon the subsidies alone. I mean, where's all this money going to? And then if you look at the breakdowns, you can see where it's going. And I can provide a link to you if you'd like. But I think that it would probably shock you if you look at this EU study. And it shows you where the aims and where the money actually goes. You know, so it's it's one of those things where I wish it wasn't the case, but unfortunately it is. And so just so you know, the number one place that this money is going to is called income support. So it's direct payments to ensure income stability for farmers. So that's the number one point. And there's some small things like rural development measures and market measures, but the number one thing goes direct payments. So, you know, we're talking about big industry and big agriculture. If we can't even talk about those subsidies and we can't even talk about where that money's going, it's a misnomer. Everything else really doesn't matter. So you're more than welcome to tell me what you think if you'd like.
It sounds like you're alluding to corruption a little bit there. And
well, I just want common sense, Carneval. Like, think about it, man. If somebody were to give you, because if we're talking about $32 billion, and like I said, I'm not here to do conspiracies. I'm here to give you the fact. Now, the intent is up for you and your viewers. But if you take a population of the United States of America at 325 million people, and you know that, you know, they're raising food at we're not just talking about their overhead costs. We're talking about free money they're getting at $32 billion.
Mm-hmm.
You know, how many realistically, you know, you're talking about giving each person, their government is giving the industry $62 million for each person. I don't know, Carneval. Do you think you could be sustainable for 1 year? Do you think you could be sustainable for 1 year on $62 million?
I mean,
I'm just asking. No, like I said, I'm not trying to draw any conspiracy theories here. This is the math, brother. Could you do it?
$62 million per person, per family?
Right.
I mean, why don't they just
not
import...
per family, per person. I'm just saying, could you do it?
Yeah, I mean, why don't they just import all the food and cars and homes and whatever else they need from everywhere else?
I'm not, like I said, I'm not here. Look it up, man. I'm not here to give you conspiracies. I'm just here to look at the fact of the subsidies.
No. Right? It's pretty obvious. It's pretty obvious
you know what
what's
I mean?
going on.
So, and if this is the community, if this is the industries that vegans want to, you know, go hand in hand with, and what do you expect us to do? Like, how do you expect us to take this seriously? And so, conspiracy theories aside, these are the facts. This is what's going on. So, people like us, I think, we look at this and we're like, wow, you know. I'll be honest with you. I'm just going to ignore the fact that those subsidies are real, and I have to think, well, food prices are going up. I have a set income. What do I got to do for my family? The only answer
clearly
at this
there's
point,
a lot of corruption. Like, yes, there's waste at every level of food production and distribution, but that would not account for that kind of money. So clearly there's corruption. And I wanted to very quickly answer somebody in the comment section, because they're talking about this corrupt World Health Organization and the studies, quote unquote, studies that they published. Look, man, if you actually look into this, the statement that they made that the vegan diet is nutritionally adequate for all stages of life, they equivocated the vegan diet with the vegetarian diet. First and foremost, they looked at studies that dealt with vegetarians, not vegans. Okay, so there's no way in hell they could have made that statement with a clear conscience. That's first and foremost. And then all these studies that you say that they look into, like, for example, the World Health Organization saying that meat is a type 1 or whatever, or processed meat is a type 1 carcinogen or whatever they said. Look, they said they considered 800 studies from all over the world, but they only looked at 12. So basically what they did is they cherry-picked the studies that fit their predetermined conclusion that their corporate masters, processed food corporations, told them to make. So I don't even know why I'm addressing this nonsense, but nonsense it is. There's a ton of, but basically the point is this: there's a ton of corruption when it comes to all these corporations. And there's, as we all know, there's plenty of money out there, plenty of resources out there to feed everybody all over the world. But for various reasons, that's just not happening.
No, I agree. And so, and you know, and It's so funny because you realize this conversation we have, you're not going to find anywhere else on YouTube, right? And so when we're talking about this from a realistic standpoint, from what you just mentioned, it brings up a good point. So you have companies that care about their bottom line, which is evident, and it's even in their mission statements. Producing maximum yield. And so when we're talking about that being the case, maximum yield means what? Well, what does that mean? Well, that means GMOs, right? Which have been proven to not give you the most significant yield, but whatever. You have GMOs, you have lots of fertilizers, lots of fungicides, you have all these chemicals that you're throwing on food. So when people want to talk about veganism, and because I think the debate with Joe Rogan, with the two people, it was good, but it came down to this one fallacy this one point. Vegans like to look at everything in the hypothetical, just like the doctor said. They like to be 50,000 feet in the air looking down and generalize everybody based upon their predisposition and their motives. And so when you look at that, yeah, you can make anything, you can swipe and put anything underneath the rug. When we're talking about corporatism, like I said, making money is great. I'm all about it. But when you're talking about not the free market principles, when you're talking about these big subsidies, when you're talking about, just a factual dishonesty of what these people want to do, like that person in the comment section, I can't look at it, but it seems like they're pretty vegan friendly. I encourage that person. Why don't you ever want to talk about the subsidies? Why don't you ever want to talk about food residue that the World Health Organization says is a proven carcinogen? Why don't you ever want to talk about that? It doesn't fit the narrative, right? I'm all about talking about vegan foods, but let's talk about vegan foods that don't have any of that crap, that don't require billions and billions of dollars to grow, and then we can have a conversation. But that conversation will never be had.
Yeah, I constantly keep making this clear. Like, I have no problem with vegans. I have no problem with you eating a vegan diet or whatever diet you choose to eat. What I have a problem with is capital V. I have to keep repeating this: veganism, the ideology, because it threatens people like you and I, and people all over the world producing food, to wanting to be self-reliant, self-sustainable, wanting to feed their families and their community. It threatens those people because it little by little, and veganism is the excuse being used right now, the corporations want to take away our rights to produce food. And you could say this about what we talked about with seeds in our last conversation, how they're starting to grab control of all the seeds out there, and how heirloom is increasingly difficult to find. You could use this to talk about raw milk, for example, and how it's being illegal, how you can't sell raw milk. Well,
dude, you should just smoke meth and do heroin and do all these other things that are becoming decriminalized. Fentanyl. I mean, you can put that in your body, but you can't put raw milk. You should be ashamed of yourself.
No, and this is the problem, because if vegans get their wish, then the whole world eats a vegan diet, then we just removed a huge source of protein, vitamins, and fat from our diet, and carbohydrates too. We just removed a huge chunk of food from the food production. And on top of that, because all of a sudden now that you're eating a disease-causing, nutrient deficient diet, you have to at the very least take B12, but probably iron, zinc, vitamin D, vitamin A. You all of a sudden have to start taking all these supplements, which nobody can produce except these corporations. So if like the system goes down in any particular area, or God forbid globally, what are you going to do to feed yourself? You can't even produce. Not only it's illegal for you to hunt, you can't produce any meat, which you could subsist on just by itself. Plants you can't. But now you have a need for all these supplements that you can't get without these corporations. And this is what strikes at the very core of this idea of food sovereignty, and how veganism threatens food sovereignty.
I agree. I agree that if vegans were to get if they were to get the world in which they claim that they want to live in, yeah, it would be to the tune of billions of people dying. I don't think there's any real argument with that. Just because if they're being intellectually honest with themselves, they would have to totally rechange how they do everything, which is not sustainable mathematically, scientifically. With that being said, I don't ever see that happening. And the reason why I don't ever see that happening is because I think that once you start to implement these changes, things are going to come to fruition, and you're going to realize that it's not sustainable on any level. Now, that does not mean, and unlike probably a lot of your viewers, I am on a plant-based diet, and I do think that there's merit to that. Now, with that being said, yes, I still intake animal sources of food, but I sustainably grow that myself. I don't depend on any system to do that, and it's pretty easy to do, right? And I'm here to dispel a lot of the myths about animal husbandry, and anybody that's ever been in an animal husbandry field like yourself realizes that these arguments that they say make absolutely no sense. And there's another good thing that you mentioned about globalism. Okay, I personally believe, and this is probably where we might disagree, but maybe on a semantic level, do I believe that you can eat a vegan diet and be healthy? Absolutely. But what's it going to require? It's going to require globalization, and it's going to require you to eat outside of your means. It's going to require you to eat outside of your crop zone, and it's going to require the globalization to the tune of hundreds of millions of animals of death, child labor, billions and billions of dollars in subsidies. You see what I mean? You can do it, but you have to allow all these bad things to happen before you can do it, and even then, it's not sustainable long term. Now,
well, but it's, you're wrong, because it's scientifically impossible to eat a nutritionally complete vegan diet, because there is no B12 anywhere in the plant kingdom.
Like I said, I agree with you. I was taking, because when you're talking about that study was taking into account that people were going to be supplementing. Do I believe that you can be 100% vegan diet and not supplement? I just don't think so. I mean, don't be wrong, there are animal sources that produce B12, but you couldn't do that sustainably. I totally agree with you. But like we've had in a previous conversation, I realize that you don't consider supplements to be a part of a healthy diet. So absent of that, yeah, you're right. I obviously include supplements just because normal people take a vitamin, but it's not sustainable, and you can't do that on any big massive scale.
But
and
the problem is that we can't produce these supplements, right? We don't have. I suppose we could, but you need.
I'm giving you an example, like for
chemical lab.
Yeah,
chemistry.
For like places with colder climates, like kind of where I'm at, and then places in Europe, we have found that common comfrey. There's many different kinds of comfrey. You have Russian comfrey, you have all these other different things, but common comfrey, which is really grown really well in colder climates, the plant does take B12 from the soil. So by eating the plant, you are getting a source of B12. Now,
well, no, see, I'm gonna have to interrupt you here, because there is no preformed B12 anywhere in the plant kingdom. There are precursors that our body has to convert into B12. So there is no true B12, not even in algae. It doesn't exist. It's a vegan myth. It's a lie.
Well, from what I've seen, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. I mean, they call it B12, but it's not cobalamin, which is the only preformed natural form of B12. There are other compounds that our body convert into B12, but then there's conversion factors and toxicity issues. And as far as comfrey goes, that's a very toxic plant that is okay to use once in a while, but you can't really consume that on because I looked into this, because I had a broken ankle, and I was using comfrey to patch myself up, and it worked great. But from what I read, if you put it on your skin, I'm not even talking about ingesting it. If you put it on your skin too often, you could develop other problems like kidney issues, I think. So
when I was looking at comfrey, like I said, there's many. I believe you're talking about the Russian variety, Russian comfrey, but common comfrey is one that's it's heirloom now, so it's been domesticated, and so that's why it's called common comfrey. It's not toxic if you ingest a lot of it. Now, like I said, this is something that we as far as humans have done over a long period of time. But I like I said, I'm not saying that I'm not defending veganism at all. What I'm saying is, in a vacuum, given globalization, given all these unsustainable practices, do I think that somebody that has a lot of money that lives in LA can can be healthy on a vegan lifestyle, paying lots of money for produce and supplements? I think they probably could. It's kind of like this is a bad example, but people talking about Magic Johnson curing himself from HIV because he injected money into his system. It's a bad joke, but essentially with enough money, yeah, I do believe these people can get the supplementation and stuff they need. But outside of that, normal people like us, if we're wanting to be sustainable, animals is the best way to get those trace minerals, to get that heme, get that iron, to get all these different things that we need, and to live within our crop zone, just like we've seen in the blue zones with Okinawa, with Costa Rica, Latin America. You're able to do this because they produce high quality food that they can grow, but everything else is gotten through the animal. And I think I think without looking at that in totality, vegans miss it. So like I said, I realize we probably disagree on a couple things there, but overall, what I'm saying is veganism is not sustainable on any level, especially when we're talking about veganic farming and veganic, trying to do this from a sustainability standpoint. I just don't see it possible. And you're right. If they do get their way and they say, hey, you can't have pets, hey, you can't eat eggs, hey, you can't consume raw milk, once they start putting measures, and I think that's what you're talking about. You're talking about, local, municipality, federal regulations that would say this is what you can and can't do, which we're already seeing. We're seeing that, especially in my country, all over the place. I agree with you.
Where does it stop? Maybe it's animals today. Tomorrow it's going to be, plants, because whatever reason, whatever excuse they find. So, I don't know. I really, and the thing that I have a problem with the most is that what gives somebody the right to tell me what I can or cannot eat? What gives somebody the right to tell some indigenous population that's been eating, let's say, cuy or guinea pig, and it's their ancestral food, it's something they've raised forever, and it's their like cultural dish? What gives somebody the right to tell them that now you can't eat it anymore because my feelings? You know what I mean?
No, and I get that. And obviously, when we're talking about, before, like I said, I don't like getting into hypotheticals because that's what vegans will do. But yes, when you're talking about being able to eat a healthy diet, like I said, there's no scientific literature there that I have seen that disproves the fact that, eating animals is going to have some horrible detriment to your body. Now, I will say I totally agree that if you're eating animals that are fed grain, that the grain's been treated like like I said, when you're talking about the globalization of food, then yeah, I can definitely see how, processed food can be bad for you. I think the vegans would have overdone it, but I think people like us, we're talking about whole foods, we're talking about real food, and yeah, I don't understand how that can be construed as anything other than what it is. Like I said, they don't have a leg to stand on, ethically, but also when we're talking about, economically, they also don't have a leg to stand on. Because at the end of the day, man, these are the same people that if they have a termite problem, they're going to hire a professional termite murderer, and I'm just saying that because that's the in quotes that they would use against us. But, if their house is being overrun by a wild animal, they have no problem telling the government to come in and kill this animal. If their yard is being torn up by wild hogs, they have no problem telling the government to come in. As long as somebody else is doing the dirty work for them, they can continue to have their virtuous, they can continue to virtue signal. But yeah, I think it's dangerous when you're talking about a small group of people that have an 84% failure rate, able to tell you and me what I can and can't do, what I can and can't grow. You know what I mean? It's very discerning. I don't think it's ever going to come to that because of their own failures within their own community. And the one good thing about vegans, especially these vegan activists, they care more about the bottom line as far as what money goes into their pocket versus actual real environmentalism. So I think that's one good thing that we have going for us as far as those people want to make money. They're not doers.
Yeah,
we are doers. And I think that the common person, especially the people watching right now, except for maybe a few agitators, they're doers. They're people who take on responsibility and they want to live the most healthy life they can because they are people that do things. And I think that's important. I think that's the message we should be getting out to everyday people because they do have power. They are empowered. And it's just, finding a system that works for them because, like I said, I think, starting with a garden and working your way up, I think that's super important. It doesn't take a whole lot of time. Like there's so many misconceptions about food sovereignty that I'm glad that we're able to address. But everything that you've said so far, yes, is it problematic? It absolutely is. And I'm like you were talking about, forcing, people to grow quinoa and all these other things, which hurt the environment, hurt the area, and they hurt the people. It's crazy to think that you have a population of people that used to be able to grow this food for themselves, and now it's so expensive because of globalization, they can't even afford it anymore. But yet they can go outside and they can see it. And I've seen that personally. That's something I've personally seen in my adult life, my adult professional life. The fact that there are people outside working these fields producing a product that they can physically touch, see, smell, and they can't taste it because they can't afford it. It's sad.
Yeah, and it's just this idea that, and I'm not saying that the food industry shouldn't change necessarily, not at all, but I blame, plant agriculture just as much as I do animal agriculture. They go hand in hand. But, there's certain kind of insanity to this idea that we can take out the most nutritionally dense food on the planet out of our diet. And in many environments, in many countries, it is that food, be it milk or cheese or meat or fish, that is actually providing the people with the nutrients that they need to be healthy. This idea that we could take this out of the global diet and replace it with synthetic chemicals and everything's going to be okay because I say so, even though there's no science to back any of it, that's just pure insanity. Not only are you taking out the most nutritionally dense food out of our diet, you actually think that you could play God and fix the problem that you yourself created. It's just insane to me.
No, you're right. And I think that, when we're talking about this, I don't want to overly simplify it, but the only way, I'll be honest with you, the only way I feel like we can be successful with this, and this is kind of what I was kind of hoping to, grow to in this conversation is, what can we do? Because I'm sure a lot of people are listening to this, and it's probably very depressing. I guess at this point, I think about it so much, and I'm doing so many things here that I guess I don't see it. But I realize this can be really depressing. So what can people do? I think is huge. And from everything that we've said so far, yeah, I mean, we are talking about a system that and I'm sure farmers have great intentions. I'm not questioning intentions. I can only go on the fact, but we are in a deficit, and our population is very high, and there's going to be a tipping point. And it's like I don't know if you guys seen the movie Collapse by Michael Rupert. If you don't, I recommend it. It's a great movie, documentary. But he makes a really good point. In every system, you have a growth that's followed by a crash. And once, sustainability of that organism can no longer be held, whether we're talking about deer in a prairie or you're talking about wolves in the tundra or whatever, once that growing population can't sustain itself, there's going to be a crash. And make no mistake, any organism is susceptible to that. And what we have done is we created an artificial system that's being patched right now. It's being patched by fiat currency. And I'm not saying it won't go on for a couple more years, but when is that crash going to happen? And when that crash happens, it's going to be so ridiculous. And I believe that's going to be when we can no longer afford the food that's being produced because it's been artificially held up. Like I said, the fact that if I were to go to a grocery store, like I would, I was at the store the other day, and I saw that meat, and it was up to like $4 a pound. And for other places, that may sound really cheap. I know, especially some people in the European countries, but for a really good steak, it's about $4 a pound. And I was just like, wow, this is ridiculous, And so, but they're being subsidized. Everybody's being subsidized.
Corn,
and it's just
corn
like
subsidies.
Yeah, corn too. And you're looking at all these things. You're like, wow, these food prices are going up to the point where everyday people are looking at the produce and being like, wow, like I have to really decide what I want. I mean, this food looks great, but I can't, I have to think about being able to afford it. And that should never happen, especially in a system where they're getting billions and billions of dollars. So I think that eventually, people are going to have to, figure it out. And unfortunately, it's not going to be a government fix. It's going to be an us fix.
I think people in the United States and the Western world in general, maybe not everywhere, are finally slowly starting to see the real price of food, because like you say, their food is being subsidized. And when I say corn subsidy, that reflects on the price of eggs, the price of that grain finished steak, everything. So like, do you have any idea, for example, how much 100 pounds of corn costs in the United States?
No, but I mean, are you talking about corn from like how I would buy it at a store, or are you talking about
feed
feed corn?
Yeah.
Let's see. I can definitely look it up for you at my local.
Yeah, go ahead.
You want me to look it up local for you, like where I could get it locally?
That would be awesome. I'm really curious, because I'll tell you that over here the price goes between $16 and $20, which is, I'm guessing it's going to be at least as much, if not more expensive than in the United States. But, you have to take into consideration that the average Ecuadorian makes $15 a day.
So I can
so
tell you,
yeah,
so I can tell you from, and this is probably going to be a little skewed. So I want to give you 100%. I want to be 100% transparent. Okay. So if we're talking about like a cracked corn or a grain corn
yeah,
that,
that you would give to your chickens.
that would give to my, well, not that I would give to my chickens, but
Right.
like the normal average person that's been treated and everything, you're looking at for 50 pounds where I can get it locally about $13 American dollars. But if you're looking at corn that hasn't been treated, that doesn't have all that other extra gunk, where it goes up significantly to about $30 for 25 pounds.
Organic.
I wouldn't even say organic, because my definition of organic is a bit different, but sure, yes, for all intents and purposes, right? And that's just me being fully transparent with you.
Yeah, so that's about $26 for 100 pounds, and this is where people make, I don't know, $100 a day, maybe a little less on average, I don't know, but so relatively speaking, corn in Ecuador is 4 to 5 times more expensive than in the United States. So that's crazy. That's crazy.
And it's just, and like I said, gosh, I know this sounds so depressing, but until we, and this is my honest opinion, fuck, how do I say this? My personal opinion, we shouldn't be feeding grains to grass-fed animals. We can definitely feed animals way cheaper, way healthier than we currently do it. And that's just because we're so, as a community of people, we're just not, I don't know if it's just we don't care, we're just not smart enough, but and vegans like to run with that. But the sustainability of animals is transparent to anybody who actually does it. You know what I mean? Well, and I think it's just so sad that people don't want to take that seriously.
There is a way to do it properly, feeding animals grain, because if you think about it, all that grain is, and I know it's been modified and we've hybridized it so it's so much bigger and it produces the grass, because that's all it is, produces a lot more of it. But when you really look at it, grain is really just grass seed. So biochemically, it should be okay for cattle to eat grass seed, because that's what they ate their entire evolution. However, because it's so much of it, it does become a problem. I agree with you. However, if you take that grain and you ferment it, you sprout it, it becomes grass again. So,
yeah, I'm sorry, and I agree. I'm all about fodder. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah,
I think fodder's
exactly,
great,
fodder.
but I think that's way different than
what they're doing. That's not what they're doing, obviously.
Right.
I know.
Right. And I totally agree. And for all your viewers, especially those that, they're probably like swinging their fist at me that do understand agriculture. I understand. I'm all about, if you're talking about wheat fodder, barley fodder, I get that. But you have to realize that is way different than the mass-produced crop.
And I would still say that that's just a supplement. I wouldn't make that
right. It's exactly no, and I totally agree with you there. And I want to make sure that but you can see people that understand what we're saying.
But as far as solutions, I'm saying, well, I know it's an extra step and it's more money, but sprout the fucking grain, guys. Like, don't just give hard, dry corn to your cattle. Sprout it. You know what I mean?
I think it's pretty easy. I mean, I can do that with trays here.
Totally.
But right. So I think it's important. So what should the average everyday person do? And this is where I get really excited, because I think that everybody should, everybody should have a garden, and that's different. I think when people think gardens, they think of, I have to go outside, get dirty, get the soil. You don't have to.
But that's how you get vitamin B12.
No, I get that. No, I totally get that, brother. I'm saying that there's so many different ways to do this in the 21st century. For people like us, yes, I have a garden and I love it. But I also realize in the wintertime that, that doesn't work. That doesn't work as well. Now, I can, obviously there's measures that I put up as far as hoops and stuff go to extend my growing season. But, even if you live in a city, like what we were just saying, people in a city can take organic heirloom seeds and they can grow all the microgreens they need in a closet with no sunlight. You know what I mean? Like people can do this stuff. Aquaponics, you know what I mean? And that's what I don't understand. Aquaponics is literally saving many places in Africa right now. You know what I mean? Because your ability to produce all these crops and the ability to produce these high quality fish sources that, mind you, don't have the mercury problems, don't have the DHT problems, don't have any of the typical problems that we see in commercial farming. So all these things go away. When you talk about fish, fish is a very healthy source of food. But what do vegans want to say? They want to say, oh, mercury, DHT, all this other stuff. And it's like, well, if you put it in an aquaponic system, that goes away. So what's your argument now? Oh, it's unethical, and then we go back into this loop. And I think that people understanding that there are ways, when you don't look at food from a capitalistic standpoint, when you look at it for yourself, it's way different. Like raw milk, for example. There are ways that you can get milk without killing babies, without doing all this stuff that the industry finds horrible. Why does the milk industry do that? Because they're trying to produce maximum yields. But somebody like us who's growing food for sustainability and because I want the highest quality, yield really doesn't mean a whole lot. Because if I take care of the animal, if I take care of the ground, the soil, I'm gonna have everything I need, right? Homesteaders have been doing this for centuries. And all these questions about how raw milk's bad for you, I haven't seen it. The number one cause for E. coli outbreak, especially in the modernized world, is through tomatoes and spinach. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So when we're looking at this, yes, when you want to take everything that's animals and you want to just say, hey, big market, big industry is doing it wrong, then I can agree with you. But you have to show me where all these homesteaders are dying from food poisoning. You're gonna have to show me where all these homesteaders are dying from E. coli. You're gonna have to show me how all these homesteaders are obese, and it's just not true. People like us, we don't have that issue.
Dude, it's not happening. I eat probably 10 eggs a day and I don't even wash them, man. You know what I mean?
No, I get it.
It's like my chickens are healthy. And if they're sick, then, I don't eat them, obviously. They do get sick once in a while, like cold or whatever. But that leads me to another potential solution for those who don't mind eating chicken periods, obviously. Jesus Christ. Backyard chickens. And, the average family wastes so much food that you could probably feed a couple of hands, if not more, just by the food that you throw in the trash can.
Composting. I totally agree with you, 110%.
Chickens are complete omnivores, and they eat food that's spoiled and nasty. And they'll be like, I've given my chickens meat that was just like super nasty and whatever, and they love it because they're scavengers, right? And they eat whatever. It doesn't matter. They'll eat a dead animal just like a buzzard will. You know what I mean?
That's what's great about permaculture, brother. And they don't get it because, like I said in my last video I made about how I feed my rabbits for free, they literally are taking plant products, perennial grasses that are unedible to me, and they're producing a high quality, and they produce a high quality meat. Chickens do the same thing. Yeah. They take ticks, they take hay, they take all these different things, and they make a high quality food out of it. Things that we're not going to eat. So that's the loop. That's the loop of sustainability.
Every little piece that you trim off that carrot that you're gonna eat. Potato peels, as long as you boil them, right? Everything all your kitchen refuse you give it to the chickens. Chances are they're gonna eat all or most, if not all of it. You know what I mean?
And whatever don't, they'll scratch, and there you go. You have fertilizer, organic, right, natural.
Then you just make sure they have grass, and if you want to give them a little bit of grain, sprouted grain, to supplement them, also, that's great. Or you could, even if you go out and buy organic feed, which I would try to use other means of feeding them. But even if you do just that, you're still gonna get better quality eggs for less, as if you were to buy comparable quality eggs. You know
right.
what I mean?
And this whole idea, because I've seen Ed Carbstrong do this, or not Ed, Joe Carbstrong, Earthling. They're all the same person, right? No. And then so somebody had brought this up, and then he started saying, well, we can't look at animals like they're a commodity, and you got to think about their health. Like no, if you're giving them 100% quality food, you don't have to worry about them being nutrient deficient. It's like any other person or any other animal. You give them what they need, and they'll be fine, first off. And I don't look at my animals as a commodity, because they're not. A commodity item is like, coffee beans or this or that. They're an investment. They're valued. You know what I mean? So it's this idea that they try to perpetuate on normal people is just ridiculous. But you're right. You can feed. I mean, if we're just being honest, and I know we have different kinds of probably chickens depending on where you're at, but is it safe to say that on a very just being very, very conservative, one laying hen, if fed a proper diet, there should be no issue of getting 100 eggs a year out of one chicken, right? That's on the low end, right? So I think that, if a family had, 3 chickens, which doesn't require a lot of space, they're going to get a considerable amount of food from that in 1 year with minimum work, based upon my experience. I don't know, like I said, I don't want to assume that all the different breeds that we have in different countries, but I think that's like
no,
a pretty economic choice.
The hens that I get are purebred, and they will lay 300 eggs a year.
Right, and
Easy.
yeah, I agree. And the ones that I'm talking about, like
Yeah.
they produce 300 plus. I'm saying on a very conservative, like if we're being 100%,
Yeah.
like that's a lot of food. You know what I mean? And so the fact that you can do that with minimum work, sustainably, no electricity, no antibiotics, no fertilizers, no pesticides. You don't have to drive anywhere. I mean, to me, it's a no-brainer, right? But here we are.
Everybody should have backyard chickens, man. As long as you're not paralyzed or something, and you do eat eggs, you enjoy eggs, and you like to eat chicken. Why wouldn't you have backyard chickens? Like, what's stopping you?
I know people that
It's
have
not a
backyard
lot of
chickens
work. It's easy.
that don't eat the eggs. And you know what they do? Then they bake with it, or they trade them for other things. Like this is the kind of thinking we should be doing. You know what I mean? Like I have, whenever I visit my family, friends, and stuff like that. Like it's common, and I'm sure this might be, my Hispanic culture coming out, but it's very common to go visit and bring produce. And so when you go visit your family, you give them stuff, and they give you stuff. Like I think for most, Latin American cultures, that's something we do. I mean, I don't want to speak for everybody, but that's common for us. Whenever I see my mom, whenever I'm visiting my brother, that's what we do. We're like, this is produce from my garden. I give it to them, and I usually get something back, and that's just, I think that's how we should look at, our interactions. Like a handshake and a hug is great, but if you have more to give, why not? You know what I mean? And I think that basic understanding of, how societies and tribes used to be, is a good thing that we should take away. There's not obviously tradition, you got to look at what makes sense. But if you produce a lot of zucchini, right, and you have more than you're going to use, why not take some of that zucchini to you when I go visit my brother? And my brother produces a lot of strawberries, and then we, here you go, and love, hug, enjoy each other's company. Like that should be something. That's just one small thing you can do that makes a huge difference. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, and if you're vegan, you don't have to raise chickens. Just grow a garden. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like when I used to live, yeah, exactly. When I used to live in Chicago, some of my friends, they would establish guerrilla gardens in like really bad neighborhoods where there was a lot of abandoned property. They would just throw seed bombs, and like there would just be squash growing out of this like abandoned building and all types of stuff like that could be done. But if you just want to do it in your backyard, plant an apple tree, plant whatever grows in your climate. You know what I mean?
Trees are great, yeah, because shrubs, like you said, they're always going to produce, and they require minimal work. They do.
Yeah, or something like a mulberry that just produces so much, and it could grow in just about anywhere in the United States, I think. Why not? And it grows so fast. You're gonna have fruit in like what, under 5 years or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's common sense, right? And I don't know how much more we can say common sense, but these vegans, they're consumer-based vegans, right? They only care, all they care about is designer names. They care about the title, and that's all they care about. They could have all the, like, their favorite fruit could be blueberries, which they could have a couple shrubs in front of their house that produces all the blueberries they're going to need, and they would still refuse to do it. I could literally take them to a blueberry bush that has them all there, and they would rather just go to the store and buy it in that plastic package, because that's all they care about. They don't really have the they don't care about sustainability. They don't care about actually helping the environment. They would rather buy, their food products from countries, hundreds of thousands of miles away, or whatever, thousands of miles away, I'm sorry, with all the crap that comes with it. And
they don't really
that's
care.
Where we're at. They don't care. No.
They don't care about the animals either. It just makes them feel a certain way when they see slaughterhouse porn, and they have a visceral reaction. And that's all it is. They don't really care about the animals. They just, they just get into their feelings, and they throw a tantrum. It's just a bunch of unruly kids, man, in my opinion. Not everybody. There are vegans like conscientious omnivore who have their own garden, and there are others like John Kohler, for
Right.
example,
Like I said,
and they're
I
doing it
respect.
right.
Yeah, I respect conscientious omnivore to the nth degree. John Kohler from Growing Your Greens, like that guy is just I will refuse to say anything about him that's negative, because he's just, you know, he's been an inspiration to literally millions and millions of people. And he gets it. Even his last video, he did a video on cow manure because he was at least being honest, you know, honest and transparency. And so people like that, we may have a different diet, but outside of that, we agree on everything else. And there's really, I have nothing bad to say. It's the people that, because at the end of the day, I can look at a vegan straight up and say, you can call me whatever name you want, but for the love of God, grow some basil in a windowsill. You know what I mean? Like, you can call me whatever you want, but for the love of God, do something, you know? And they won't. So that's kind of where we're at. And it's a very unfortunate place to be.
Yeah, they're not interested in helping the environment. They're not interested in really participating. What they're really interested in is virtue signaling, and I don't know. It's annoying, man. But I don't want to make this too long today because I have animals I gotta go take care of. So maybe we could just wrap this up. I don't have much to say anyway, but you right ahead.
No, I'll go ahead and I'll let you have the first word, and I'll just, you know.
So my whole thing as far as food sovereignty goes is that vegans, they don't really understand what kind of repercussions removing, you know, all animal agriculture would have on societies all over the world and their own food source, even you know, as far as getting fertilizer for their own plants, you know, it's going to make their own food less healthy. It's going to have an impact on what they eat, and I don't think they quite grasp that. And it would have a profound impact on a lot of different cultures all around the world that rely on animal products to get like this one vitamin or some of these minerals that they just can't get from plants for whatever reason. And lastly, you know, this veganism, in my opinion, is a coordinated movement pushed by forces unseen, and that has a lot of useful idiots that are being emotionally triggered to become involved in this program whose ultimate goals they don't fully understand or comprehend themselves, that is going to have a negative impact on these people themselves. And you know, it's going to make us more dependent on corporations than ourselves, which is how it should be. And that is really what I mean. What I mean to say when I say that veganism impacts food sovereignty negatively, and that's my piece basically.
No, that's, I mean, yeah, I agree with I agree with that. I would say for those, I'm just going to do a recap for those that maybe are just tuning in or whatever. But from my perspective of food sovereignty, I'm going to give you the quote. I'm going to give you a few facts, and I'm going to thank you guys all for your time. Right. So, like I said, like I opened, quote from Bill Mollison. He's somebody that's huge in the permaculture, growing your food, you know, movement. He said the greatest change we can make is from consumption to production, even if only on a small scale in our own gardens. If only 10% of us do this, there's enough for everyone. Hence the futility of revolutionaries, vegans, who have no gardens, who depend on the very system they attack, who produce words and bullets, not food and shelter. So when we're really talking about this, guys, you got to look at it from just, you know, like I said, don't even look at it from an ethical standpoint, which I think, you know, there is. Don't look at it from a health perspective, you know, which we can definitely do. I think those are all in our corner. But when we're talking about sustainability and food sovereignty, the fact that the United States alone subsidizes this more than they subsidize oil now. In 2018, we're looking at $32 billion. The EU, $82 billion, around 52 billion euros. When you're looking at this, the fact that the US government is willing to give the industry $62 million per person to grow food, and they are still charging us outrageous prices, and it's still unsustainable, and they're still doing all these things. you just have to wake up. Like I said, we can talk about all these other issues and topics, but at the end of the day, we're talking about sustainability. I don't know. And if you're a vegan out there and you don't like what I'm saying, please justify those subsidies to me. Please justify those horrific practices. Please justify what the plant industry is doing. And if you can't, grow something. Like I said, you can call me the worst names in the entire world. I don't care. But for the love of God, get some soil, put it in a jar, and grow some basil in your windowsill. Do something. Because at this point, it's laughable. I know, right? Insert fallacy here, and that's what I have for you guys. I don't want you guys to take my advice on it. Look it up. Look up the subsidies that your country is giving to these industries, and divide that by the population. It's literally that simple. And if that doesn't blow your mind, at this point, I don't know what will. So, like I said, let's look at this from a common sense, scientific, mathematical point of view, because until we start doing that, until we start being intellectually honest with ourselves, this conversation isn't going to be had anymore. And it's funny because literally this conversation we just had, I have not seen it anywhere else on any forum ever. This is the first time I've seen it, and I hope we have more conversation. This is revolutionary in my opinion, because honestly, this conversation has never been had anywhere else. So like I said, there is a way to grow food sustainably. There's a way to grow animals sustainably. Growing animals sustainably is easier to do than growing plants sustainably, and that's just the truth. So
it is. It's a lot easier.
There you have it. Well, thank you guys for your time, and once again, thank your viewers for me. If you're watching, thank you guys for watching, and I hope you guys learn some stuff, and I hope to do this, more regularly in the future with you guys for sure. This is great.
Totally. Yeah, everybody, thanks for coming through. I didn't see any questions in the chat, but forgive me if there were some and I just didn't see them. But hope you enjoyed the talk, and there will be more on all kinds of topics. Hopefully every Saturday right around this time. So thanks everybody once again, and have a good day.
Thanks, guys.